This is the MaTech folding rear sight used by a lot of the armed forces throughout the United States, and of course are very popular on civilian rifles as well. You can pick them up on eBay, 30, 40, used, depending on where you're looking. One of the biggest problems in the focus of this video is that the sight eventually has a tendency to just pop up on its own inadvertently due to charging it on your ARs. I have this mounted right now on a 6R 522, so the problem isn't as prevalent because the bolt isn't as heavy, and a lot of times it appears that there's no fix for it. There's a couple of things that could be wrong, and that's what I want to focus on now. What happens when you pick these things up used is there's a little detent right here. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but when you look at yours, if you own one, you'll see this detent. That can actually wear down. And if it's too terribly worn, there's not a whole lot you can do, with the exception of if you have a little tack welder or something, you can maybe add some metal onto that and then use your Dremel and try to shape it back down. Maybe take a picture of it first, or take a picture of somebody else who has a new one. However, one of the quickest solutions and the most prevalent problem is actually not here at all, because that's pretty tough. That's pretty strong. I believe this is aluminum. Don't quote me on that. But the biggest problem actually is the horizontal pin that runs through here that holds the spring for the leaf pop-up leaf sight. It holds the spring and the leaf sight in place. And if you'll note down here, and I've got this adjusted windage wise all the way to the left so that you can see down in here in this well, but there's a hole right there, and you can sometimes see the pin has worked its way out. So I'll use the punch and give you an example. It can be just looking like it's sticking out like that. If you see any of that sticking out, you'll be pleasantly surprised to find that if you take a screwdriver, now keep in mind you won't have this much room between here because as I've said, you can crank it over yourself, or you can go ahead and try to wedge a screwdriver down in there carefully and nudge it back into place, and then try it and see if it's tight. Now this is one of the problem with, I own 4 of these, and this one did have a problem. Look how tight it is now. I mean, it's really hard to get back up, and the reason why is because I've managed to get, I've pushed the pin back in. Well, I wasn't satisfied with just pushing the screwdriver, and as I worked it, it looked like it was coming back out again. So what I did was move the windage all the way over to the left, and I took a punch and a hammer, and I got in here at a diagonal as best I could without scratching it up too much, and I tapped it as far in as I could so that it actually goes. Now, because this side of the metal is touching up against the sidewall, the pin can't go all the way through to the other side. I don't know much about the design of this. I don't know if it ever could. I don't know if I've punched it more firmly into the other side, so it's going to take a lot longer for it to work its way back out. But I'm satisfied with the result. This is a really hard to get to pop back up. I'm going to really have to work on it. Now, actually, as of this video, I'm watching the pin start to work its way back out. So I'm thinking that this pin is actually permanently defective, is pretty worn, and it's seen its last days. So it's kind of good this is happening live right now. So I'm gonna tap this back in here. You got to be careful. Do it at an angle. Try not to tear up your metal too much. Punch that back in there as best you can, and you'll see how tight it gets. It gets really tight. So that at least confirms that that's the problem. So what I may do, and I can update y'all later, is see if I can use some kind of material like JB Weld or something to that effect. I mean, the site's only 30 bucks, so it's more of a project, and I have 3 others that function nicely. So get some JB Weld, maybe put a cap in there and then smooth it out along the edge and see how tough that holds up. I don't know, it could pop it right out, or I might hold it in place for years. We'll see. But at least knowing is half the battle for you folks who own these and want to know why they pop up when you pull your when you try to pull your charging handle to the rear and let your bolt fly. That is why it pops up. All right, I've decided to add to the video. In the last segment, I failed to mention a few things. That the problem with this can also exist on the other side as well. The pin could come out the other side, so I want to make sure that you know to check either side for the pin coming out. And then the detent that I spoke of right here that holds that's to hold this down. When I first talked about the detent that may be wearing down. Like I said, that's not necessarily the problem. Now, I got my pin punched back in, and I decided to go ahead and add JB Weld, as you can see in there. All it is a 50-50 mix. I applied it with a toothpick. I was very careful to go along not going past the top part here. I applied it inside there, and also brought it on around and made it connect and kind of fold over and spread it along here. I was very careful not to get it on the threading screw for the elevation so that still turns. I'm going to say this is probably about 2-3 millimeters thick. You know, JB Weld, once it reaches a certain consistency, you can work with it and shape it. What a lot of people don't know, as long as your the thing you're working on is all metal or doesn't melt, you can put it in the oven, put it on bake, and then warm, or 200 degrees to warm, somewhere in between there, and let it sit in there for about 45 minutes, and it dries the JB Weld rather quickly. That way you're not waiting 24 hours to find out if your work was effective or not. You're able to start handling it right away. This is only I had to pull this out with an oven mitt just a couple of minutes ago. It's cooled off now, and it's as hard as a rock. You know, a lot of people that work with JB Weld know that it's still tacky at a certain point. You can dig your fingernail in there, and this is not happening with just 45 minutes in the oven. It still may be curing inside. Keep in mind that once I hammered the pin further in, it left kind of a hole, a well, if you will, in there. So I made sure I filled that quite well with the JB Weld and a toothpick, and then continued to spread along this edge, being very careful where I placed it. And now it's dry. Now, the look might be unattractive to some people. I think that I could probably get in there with a Dremel and probably smooth all this out if I really wanted to and was that concerned about it, and or add also the birchwood black paints that a lot of us use on our ARs to do touch-ups. I could probably just apply some birchwood paint in there and cover this up, and it'd be hardly even be noticeable. I'm not too concerned about that. I got a sight functioning again, and that's what my main concern was. Once this is put back to center, I think that it's not going to be that noticeable. I don't think we're going to care, just as long as the sight is functioning. And I brought what would otherwise be a completely dead sight. Well, not dead, but it's always popping up, so to me that makes it not functional, and I brought it back to life. It's got a really solid latch down capability. So here we have the final product. I went ahead and filed it down. It was easier to crank it all the way to the right and just use one of my wife's soft fingernail files and just worked at it, and smoothed it out pretty nicely. You don't want to go too close to it, or you're going to be taking away the whole point and why we spread the JB Weld all the way around to the other side. You want it to really have something to hang on to, because it's such a flat surface. JB Weld might not have really any adhering properties. So spread it out as far as you can so that you create basically a whole nother wall. Hopefully it'll keep that pin from punching through the JB Weld. And then I touched it up with the Birchwood Casey's Super Black, Flat Black. That's what I use to touch up my ARs. Still looking for something better. It's flat black, but it still comes off a little bit shiny. I would like it to be a little more flat, but it does the job. You know, when you have most of your parts on your AR are black, and then that shine is real noticeable, but that's going to be flat side down, so nobody's going to notice that when you're looking right down into the sight. It's not too bad. It's a functional sight. It works. You know, kind of beat up. It is what it is. So hopefully you guys can use some of this information here. Again, totally making the sight a functional sight. It's really tight. Holds up quite well. I'll be paying attention to that other side to make sure that the rod doesn't come out that side. If so, I'll do the same thing on that side. It was just a fun little project. So again, if anybody has any comments or anything they'd like to contribute or questions, feel free to do so.